Hey book fighters, it's Wednesday, it's Sarah, and I just finished reading Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Is this video up early enough for you, Dan? Are you still awake? Since we are apparently now your dealers? Anyway, Fahrenheit 451. Good book. I went into it expecting to like it. I mean, it's a book that's against book burning, so I like that. It's one of those books where it's basically... it's a message book with, like, all caps on the message. Story characters, those are all, like, well behind message. Which normally really, really annoys me. Like, I like books with a message that is subtle. But this one, I was okay with it. I don't know. I guess because I went into it knowing you read this book to read a book about anti-book burning, which is, I'm totally, obviously, anti-book burning, so, yeah. One issue I did have with it, it's very descriptive. Now, I'm okay with things that are very descriptive. I love things that have a lot of sensory detail and are very engaging and you really feel like you're right there in the story. But it can be a bit too much. And this kind of was at times. Like, there were points where I was just like, I have to go back and reread this whole entire page because I have no idea what's going on because there's too much description. It wasn't quite like in Lord of the Rings where the action just stops so that I can tell you the history of this particular rock. But it was more like, okay, I get it. This has been pretty thoroughly described. Let's move on. But it continues to be described for the next 3 paragraphs. It didn't get, like, as ridiculous anywhere that stood out to me as, like, say, The Crystal World, as Dan described it, or whatever that book was that Julia read that I can't remember what it was, but it had the line, the powerful arch of his gluteus maximus, which is just not an acceptable description at all anywhere. I mean, gluteus maximus, seriously, you only use that in med school and art school, and even in art school, it's pretty weird if it's not in anatomy class. Wow. I mean, it could be in some circumstances. Art school's just weird like that. Yeah. But yeah, I enjoyed this book. It was very difficult for me to get through, though, because of that. So, good thing it's short. Because if this book had continued like that and been long, I would not have wanted to finish it. But I would definitely recommend it. It's a book that everyone should definitely read. But just go into it knowing everything will be described to you. In detail. Way more than you want. Yeah. So questions. The only question, as far as I'm aware, and being that I just typed up a list of all of the questions that we've had for the last, like, over a month, I'm pretty sure that I'm correct in saying the only question I have to answer this week is Dan's. But I can't actually remember what his question was. Need to remember that.
Or in the childhood of the writer, for instance. Or does the text only begin as the reader picks up the book? Does the text begin with its title, or with the first word of the so-called body of the text? So I think that's a really interesting question. Like,
okay. I remember now. I don't know why. I've had the greatest difficulty remembering this question. I've watched that video so many times just to try and remember this question and think of an answer, but I can't remember it. But anyway, I now recall the question, and my initial thought is first thing it makes me think of is the part in Deathly Hallows when Luna is trying to get into the Ravenclaw common room and she has to answer questions so that she will learn, because Ravenclaws do that. They're so silly. And the question is, which came first, the Phoenix or the Flame? And Luna's answer, which the door accepts as a correct answer, is... it is an unending cycle which has no beginning and no end. And that's kind of how I think of a story. Like, overall, for the whole story that's actually contained within the book, I tend to feel like we're only getting part of it. We don't get from the very, very beginning, because no matter how far you go back, there will always be something before this. Even if it's like an origin myth of how the world was created, there's usually still something before that, and obviously we don't go the whole way up to the end, so we're only getting a part. So I feel like there's not necessarily a beginning to it in that way. As far as beginning for the creation of the story, which is what the question's actually about, Sarah, get on topic, I feel like it's kind of all of the above. Like, a story begins many, many times, but it doesn't have just one set beginning. Like, I tend to feel like a story doesn't actually begin with an author. Like, a story already exists and is given to an author, and the author is allowed to sort of transcribe it. So in that way, I kind of feel like it doesn't have a beginning, like it was just always there, kind of like Lauren was saying last week. But yet at the same time, I also feel like all of those circumstances that Dan mentioned in the thing that he read is a sort of beginning to the story. And that every time a new person reads the story, it begins again. And it just continues on, always beginning, always becoming something new, always growing and always changing. Which is why I kind of feel that reading is kind of a really subjective thing, like really any art criticism, which is why I find reviews so hard to do. Yeah. Because in a way it's almost not like art, because you're imitating your own perception of reality, whereas with art, if it's supposed to be realistic, I mean visual art, of course, if it's supposed to actually be realistic, then we have something to judge it against. But with literature, every single person's perception of reality is different from every other person's perception of reality, so it's very subjective, and this is not answering the question. I think I kind of got an answer in there somewhere, and then I went off on a tangent, so I'm going to end this now. Next week is Teen Read Week, I believe that's what it's called, and so I'll be reading a young adult novel, but I don't know which one, because the book I was planning on reading, I'm not sure if it's considered an adult novel or a young adult novel. I don't know, it's an independent publisher and they don't actually specify. So, I'm going to decide this right now, and hopefully I make a good decision. See, I need to pick something kind of short because I have midterms, although my biggest midterm is due tomorrow. So, yeah, that's going to be fun. I think I will read I Am the Messenger by Marcus Zusak. I think that's the author's name. I don't feel like going over and getting it off the shelf because I'm lazy. So, Katie, I will see you tomorrow. And Dan, I'm very glad that you're back, and stay off of Real Crack. Bye!